Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Kansas City Royals. We are at the end of the 2029 season, and it was ultimately an unsuccessful season for the Royals. 86 and 76 record, 6 games out in the American League Central, and we finished 3 games out of the wild card. So, incredibly disappointing season for the Royals. We had the best run differential in the American League at plus 141. We were fourth in the AL in runs scored. We were second in the AL in runs allowed. So by just about any measure, we should have been a playoff team, but we finished 10 games worse than we were expected to finish. And what that meant is that we were on the outside looking in when all was said and done. 6 games out of the division and 3 games out of the wild card. We lost our last 7 games of the year. Our top player, Bobby Witt Jr., went down with an injury with 9 games left. We won the first 2 games at home against Chicago with him and then dropped the third game against the White Sox. Still were in pretty good position at that point and still had a playoff spot, a wild card spot at that point. And then we were swept by the Minnesota Twins and the White Sox again on the road over our final 6 games of the season. So 7 losses in a row, and for the first time in 5 seasons, the Royals are not in the playoffs, as the calendar will be turning to October. I mentioned that we finished 4th in the AL in runs scored. You can see we were good to middle of the pack in most offensive categories. 4th in hits, 4th in batting average, 11th in home runs, 7th in extra base hits. We're the toughest team in the league to strike out, led the league in steals and base running. And then our pitching was really good overall. 2nd in ERA, 8th in starter ERA, which is worse than we've been for several years now. Once again, one of the top bullpens in baseball with the best bullpen ERA in the AL. Added up to 2nd in runs allowed, 1st in pitcher WAR, 2nd in hits allowed, 2nd in opponent batting average, middle of the pack in BABIP, tied for 1st in homers allowed, only 10th in walks, but 2nd in the AL in strikeouts, and then middle of the pack in defensive efficiency, pretty good in zone rating. So it should have added up to a better season than it was, but for whatever reason, the Royals particularly struggled in one-run games, weren't that good on the road, and it added up to a season that has us watching on television as the playoffs begin. Taking a look at some of the key players in our everyday lineup, as I mentioned, we lost Bobby Witt Jr. at the end, still out with that fractured thumb now. Not that it matters. He's got all of off-season to recover at this point, but hit 275 with 19 homers, 85 runs driven in, 116 OPS plus, 113 WRC plus, and a 4.9 WAR. I think it's probably likely that he's going to win a 5th straight Gold Glove Award at third base. And there is potential, though, that he will be our starting shortstop next year because Nicky Lopez, who we brought back on a 1-year deal, is once again a free agent. He's going to turn 35 next year. Had a really nice year for us, hitting 282, close to league average in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus, and a 3.3 WAR, given that he's a good defensive shortstop. He's looking for a lot more money now, though. He's looking for $9 million a year and also 5 years. So a lot of money and a lot of years for a player who's going to turn 35 next year. So we may be moving on from Nicky Lopez, and if we can't find an acceptable replacement through free agency or trade, it's possible that Bobby Witt Jr. will slide over to that shortstop spot. Shi-Tong Kim followed up his really good rookie year with even better second season, 293 batting average, 25 homers, led the team with 114 runs driven in. Put up a 131 OPS plus, 128 WRC plus, but an even better WAR than he had a year ago, largely because he played more at second base this year than he did at the previous season. He was almost purely a first baseman back in 2028. Got some more action at second base this year, and you can see he is extremely competent at both of those positions and can also play third or short for us if we need him to. So very important part of our team going forward with Ken. Sal Frelick had probably his healthiest season ever for us, the fragile outfielder. Started 131 games for us, scored over 100 runs, led the American League with 47 steals, was caught just 4 times, batted only .269, but still put up a 107 OPS plus, 108 WRC plus, and a 4.2 WAR. So a nice year from the 29-year-old outfielder. And then MJ Melendez, our catcher, bounced back from a bit of a disappointing 2028, hit .255 with 16 homers, 52 runs driven in, OPS plus increased from 99 to 116 as he knocked 30 doubles this year, which helped out, 3.7 WAR, so he doubled his WAR compared to last year. So a solid season from Melendez as well. We've already talked about Nicky Lopez. Those were the top 5 players in WAR. Luis Jose, the center fielder who we made a big trade for Boston with last offseason, missed about 3 months due to injuries, so he really only had half a season, but was pretty productive in that half a season. Hit .277, 120 OPS plus, 119 WRC plus. You can see he's a good defensive outfielder, although his ratings have actually gone down a bit compared to what he was when he picked him up. He's won Gold Gloves each of the last 2 years in Boston. Given that he only played 66 games this year, probably unlikely that he's going to get a third straight Gold Glove, but hopefully, despite him being relatively injury prone, we can nurse him through the next few seasons and get some value out of him as our starting center fielder. Stephen Paulini kind of moved into more of a bench role for us, which is really what he's more suited at. And you can see he performed a lot better this year, hitting .282, only 255 at-bats, but a 120 OPS plus after being a bit below average each of the last 2 years. So I think being a bench player actually suits him better. Ricardo Cabrera, the young second baseman, had a bit of a down year, batted just .240, 78 OPS plus, 75 WRC plus, and he ended up losing his starting second base job late in the year to Shitong Kin, as I mentioned earlier. So he's still very young. He's only going to be 25 next year, and he's still pretty inexpensive. So and he's pretty versatile defensively, so he would be a great utility infielder, but I think there's still a chance, particularly if we move on from Nicky Lopez, that Cabrera will be back in the starting lineup next year. Peyton Williams had a big injury, torn thigh muscle right at the beginning of July, which fractured his season, basically only played half a year. Did have 18 homers and 56 ribbies, 119 OPS plus, 117 WRC plus, only a 1.1 WAR, given that he's just a miserable defensive player, but still a productive season from him. No guarantees that he's going to be back with us next year. He's arbitration eligible and expected to make about $11 million, so he's going to be one of many difficult decisions we have to make this offseason. Jose Barrero, backup infielder, was fine, hit .239 in limited play. Reese McGuire, our longtime backup catcher, hit just a .179. He is still good defensively, but clearly a below-average hitter at this point. He's going to be 35 by next season, so we may look to move on from him rather than bring him back. Junior Marin, a bit of a disappointing year for the second-year player. After 30 homers and 92 ribbies as a rookie, doesn't seem like he slipped back that much with 27 homers and 91 runs batted in. But his batting average fell by 34 points. He struck out a lot more, walked a lot less frequently, and his OPS plus and his WRC plus both plunged, 40 points and close to 40 points. So hopefully we can get a better year out of the young corner outfielder next season than we got from him this year. Josh Lowe, who we traded for right before the trade deadline, not all that effective. 223 batting average and 6 homers and 197 ribbies. Like the fact that he was a solid defensive outfielder, but unlikely that we will have him return as a free agent. Josh Young, who we also picked up in that trade, not particularly effective either. Hit just 216 over 88 at bats. We did get Chicago to keep the majority of his contract, though, so he will be back with us next year in the final year of his contract as a utility infielder. A couple other players to mention. Zach DeCenzo has been a utility infielder for us for several years. Just a brutal season. Started out with some injuries and then could never get it going at the major league level. We had him going back and forth between Kansas City and Omaha for much of the year. Batted just a $125 in 56 at bats, and he's expected to make about $3.3 million in arbitration next year. So he is another player that we may look to move on from, particularly with the fact that we have Josh Young on the team now. Jason Dominguez, who filled in at center field for us when Jose was hurt, ended up not doing much at the major league level. Hit just a $179 and 279 at bats. He is still in the mix to be a backup outfielder next season, but obviously we would hope that he would hit better than that. And then the last player I want to mention is the number 6 prospect in baseball, Alex Vasquez, who after a great stint in Double-A to start the year was pretty mediocre in Triple-A. We did bring him up in September, and he hit just 239 over 88 at-bats, 1 home run. You look at the batting profile that he has, though, and pretty unlikely that he is not going to be on the Major League roster when the season starts next year. Similar to Peyton Williams, who we just talked about, doesn't really have a position that he can play effectively defensively. He did play some first base for us down the stretch, but the fact that we have Vasquez waiting and want to give him some at-bats could definitely mean that Zach DeCenzo and or Peyton Williams are not back with us next season, with their price tags getting higher and higher. Turning to our pitching staff, Caleb Lagerwell was one of the top pitchers in baseball in the first half of the season, earned his first All-Star appearance, but when all was said and done, kind of had a typical Caleb Lagerwell year. 14-7 record, 3.63 ERA, 179 strikeouts over 163 and 2/3 innings, 115 ERA plus, 75 FIP minus. A good solid year from him, but at one point we thought he was going to be a contender for the Cy Young Award, which he may get some votes for, but certainly isn't going to win. Spencer Bauer, our ace, a bit of a down year for him, 11-11 record, 4.61 ERA, which is really high for him, and only 199 strikeouts this year, over 152 1/3 innings. That said, he's a fragile pitcher. And we basically got 3 complete seasons in a row from him at this point, including his Cy Young Award winning season in 2027 when he led the league in FIP minus and pitcher WAR, and the Royals won the World Series. So we've been able to make him kind of a 5-inning pitcher, but keep him relatively healthy. Hopefully he'll be a little better for us next year when we may need him to really be the ace, because we're probably going to be moving on from Trevor Rogers, who bone spur surgery back in June. So he missed all of 2027 for us with a major injury, and then he missed half of this season with a significant injury. He's going to be 32 by next year. He was already fragile in terms of injury proneness before this latest elbow injury. And we have an $18 million team option on him for next year. I think we are pretty likely to move on from Mr. Rogers. He will not be in the Royals neighborhood next season, most likely, but we'll be making that decision in the coming days. Will Goebel, nice year for him. Starts for us sometimes, mostly out of the bullpen. 3.87 ERA over 135 innings, put up a 2.7 WAR for us, a 72 FIP minus. So another good effective year from Mr. Goebel. Tyler Bosma kind of got a full-time role in the rotation for us this year. Went 10-8 with a 4.14 ERA. Struck out 157 over 147 and 2/3 innings. So the left-hander was certainly respectable for us as a back-of-the-rotation starter. Ricky Vanasco, 28 starts, 6-7 record, 4.94 ERA. So that's kind of the worst year we've seen from Vanasco in a while. The only concern we've ever had about him is his control. And this year with 65 walks and 129 in the third innings, obviously slightly over one walk every 2 innings, which is definitely not optimal. Looking at some of the other pitchers, Zach Jacobs, another guy who did start for us from time to time, 9-2 record with 12 saves, started 13 games, a really nice 2.98 ERA over 127 innings pitched. His 93 FIP minus suggests maybe he wasn't really that good, but has still consistently been a above average pitcher when he's gotten a chance at the major league level. Aaron Ashby, brought him back after a season away in St. Louis. Thought he was going to be a big lefty for us out of the bullpen, and he certainly was, with a 1.99 ERA over 99 2/3 innings. Very happy to have him back on board. We've got a $4 million team option for him this coming season, which we likely will pick up. Austin Roberts, our longtime closer, may have pitched his last games with Kansas City. Similar to Bobby Witt Jr., he suffered a day-to-day injury and missed most of that 7-game losing streak to end the season, which wasn't optimal. But he is not quite as good as he used to be. 3.36 ERA, did strike out 94 batters over 61 2/3 innings, but 125 ERA plus and an 80 FIP minus, although they sound great in the context of his career, where he's put up a 163 ERA plus and a 66 FIP minus. He's basically had, for his full seasons with the team, his 2 worst seasons over the last couple of years, and he is arbitration eligible and expected to make close to $17 million this coming season, so he is another player that we may need to move on from. Jack Wiesenberger, a minor league free agent signing that we made not too long before the season started, had a really nice year for us, 1.83 ERA over 44 1/3 innings pitched, so could definitely see him having a role on the team next season. Will Bryan, another very solid year out of the bullpen for him, 108 2/3 innings, put up a 2.40 ERA, so a very valuable bullpen arm for us. Will Klein, we traded him away when we picked up Lowe and Young before the trade deadline. Hated to lose him, but that's the price you pay sometimes. RJ Dabovich, another respectable season out of the bullpen for him with 3.04 ERA and 98 strikeouts over 74 innings. Bryce Hubbard was good. He was back and forth between a starting role in Omaha and a relief role with the Chiefs, but put up with the Royals, put up a 1.71 ERA over 26 1/3 innings at the major league level. Colby White, we picked him up before the trade deadline. He was not great, but not bad. 3.42 ERA over 23 2/3 innings. And then Mackenzie Gore, a little bit of a disappointing year for him with a 3.86 ERA over 79 1/3 innings pitched. Started a couple games for us this year, but put up a negative 0.7 WAR, which was the worst among any of the pitchers on the Royals in this 2029 season. So as we start preparing for the off-season, definitely failed in our ownership goal to win the championship this year. Has been a pretty good run here with the Royals. Fan interest is high, fan loyalty is good. The market is still relatively small, but it is what it is. We're not going to change that, but We're in a tough position as far as our finances. We've had really steady growth in our budget history, given that our winning percentage dropped by over 100 points this year, and we missed the playoffs for the first time since 2024 this season. We may not, and we also are going to lose a little bit of money this year. We may not get the financial bump that we've got in previous years. And you can see right now we've got potentially no money available for extensions. Now, there is potential for us to open up a lot of money, though. I mentioned Trevor Rogers, where we have a team option that we are likely to decline in the coming days. I mentioned Austin Roberts. I think it's going to be pretty hard to justify spending 17 million-ish on a closer who's going to be pitching 60 to 80 innings for any team, much less the Royals. So we may look to trade him away. Spencer Bauer, a big arbitration number, but I think we'll bring him back. Peyton Williams, though, almost $11 million for a player that's got nowhere that he can really effectively play except for DH. He has been a solid hitter over the course of his career, 117 OPS plus, 117 WRC plus, but with the fact that we have a much younger and cost-effective player that we think could have an even better bat, but also most likely and most effectively would be in that DH hole, and Alex Vasquez, it may be time to look at what we can get for Peyton Williams in trade. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Zach DeCenzo, his arbitration number has come down a lot over the last couple of months as he hasn't been hitting at the major league level and then spent some time in AAA. But we've got a decision to make with him also. So we do have potential to open up a fair amount of money to get back under budget and give us the option to bring on some additional players in the off season. So we'll have some big decisions to make over the coming weeks. But despite the fact that the roster is likely to look somewhat different in 2030 than it did in 2029, we are definitely not tearing this thing down yet, and we are definitely not in rebuild mode. Next year is the last season that we will definitely have Bobby Witt Jr. on the team at a very reasonable $13 million. You can see he's got a player option for the year after at $27 million. Don't know whether he'll opt into that or not when he finally has the opportunity to become a free agent. But as long as we have Bobby Witt Jr. under a very manageable contract and Caleb Lagerwell on a decent contract, Sal Frelick on a decent contract, MJ Melendez on a pretty decent contract, and Shi-Tong Kim at a very reasonable contract, although perhaps we should think about buying out his arbitration years and some of his free agency years in the coming months. We're still going to be a win-now team next year while we've got Bobby Witt Jr. at a very reasonable contract, even if we don't come back with as high-powered a pitching staff as we've had, and even if we do decide to move on from some of the players I mentioned, the goal is not to save that money and not spend it. If we save some money from some of the player decisions we make in the coming weeks, we will be looking to add some salary by either trading for some big-time players and or signing free agents in an effort to get the Royals back into the playoffs back in 2030 and try to kind of maximize as many playoff victories and trips to the playoffs and potential opportunities to win the World Series as we can while we've got a player like Bobby Witt Jr. under contract. Just checking in on some potential players we could look to sign to long-term contracts. Our top starter, Spencer Bauer, is looking for a 10-year deal, averaging $27 million a year. Would give us a bit of a discount compared to his arbitration number next season, but then is looking for close to $29 million a year after that. Given that he's going to be 30 by this time next year and he's already fragile, there's no way we can afford to invest that kind of money into him. So we'll likely just look to bring him back at his somewhere around his arbitration number for next year and then deal with the ramifications in the off season. Austin Roberts wants a one-year deal at $18.6 million. So I think even if we could get him at say 16 and a half, if we try to sign him before arbitration, that's just such a huge number that I think it's time to shop him. Shitong Kin, only 24 years old, incredible defensive versatility and pretty darn good at a couple of infield positions, and has been a really good bat, durable player. Would definitely consider signing him. He's looking for an 8-year deal, averaging $15.5 million a year. That's a lot of money, but particularly if we end up losing Bobby Witt Jr. down the line, he could kind of take over as the best player on our team, which he very well could be. So he is definitely someone interesting to think about, but we don't really have the money to sign him to that type of extension right now, which means it. Let's see, what is Peyton Williams interested in a long-term contract? No, he's just looking for 1 year at $12 million. So we could potentially bring Peyton Williams back maybe around $10.5 million next year. As I mentioned, that's an awful lot of money for a one-dimensional hitter who's going to, turn 30 at the end of next year. But as I mentioned, Alex Vasquez is our DH of the future. So I think that it may be time to shop Peyton Williams, see what, if anything, we could get for him. I'm not sure how much interest there'll be. Actually, there's a fair amount of, there's not that much interest. Interesting. We did have veterans there. What about for prospects? Actually, let's see if we just go completely crazy in terms of wanting to cut salary. And traded both Austin Roberts and Peyton Williams. Let's ask for a prospect package. See what we could get for those two players who are going to be making big money next year. I mean, Frank Tolbert, he's a closer, so not optimal, but looks like he could definitely be a useful bullpen arm. He's got the stamina to start. He just only has 2 pitches, so he is definitely a bullpen arm. Looking through the rest of these offers, highlighted by Emmanuel Gomez, not all that exciting. So these guys don't have a ton of value. Rene Villalobos, young second baseman. He can play second base at the major league level. I honestly think he's more of a utility infielder on a good team than a starting second baseman. None of these guys look all that exciting. Tony Rubio, third baseman from the Yankees. Only 17 years old, but looks like he could be an average major league third baseman. So it's kind of interesting and kind of sad that those two players that have been so important to us over the years are just don't have a ton of value, but they're also getting to the point where they're going to start making a lot of money. So I guess it makes a little bit of sense in a way, but not all that exciting when you look at a prospect package for both of them. Just looking at a single player in terms of prospects and regulars and veterans for Austin Roberts while we're shopping people. And again, not going to get full value for him, that's for sure. But I don't know that we want to be spending $17 or $18 million on him next offseason too. So Francisco Alvarez from the Mets, kind of interesting. He's making a lot of money. I don't think we can afford to be paying 2 catchers that kind of money, but to have him and Melendez, a left-handed bat and a right-handed bat of both decent hitting catchers, decent gloves, it's probably a luxury that we can't afford. If the Mets were willing to eat a ton of that contract, though, it might be interesting. I tend to think they're not going to, though. They can't afford to retain much of it at all, so their finances are such a mess. Yeah, they'll retain 5%. That's not going to do much for us. So we've got some decisions to make with some of these players who don't have a ton of trade value because they're getting to their final arbitration years and they're making a lot of money for what they are, and they're making a very lot of money in the context of Kansas City's payroll, unfortunately. And we've got an interesting trade potentially working with the Brewers. We would be sending them our longtime superstar closer Austin Roberts, as well as Zach DeCenzo, going to be 30 next year, utility infielder for us. We would get Freddie Zamora, a more cost-effective utility infielder. Not all that exciting. He's going to be 31 next year. Has been kind of a league average hitter over his 5 major league seasons. And we'd also get Gordon Graceffo, a pitcher who's kind of been a league average pitcher over his 6 major league seasons. But he profiles as someone who looks like he could be a little bit better than average. I guess the issue is he just doesn't throw all that hard. But I think pitching in Kansas City with a good defense behind him, there may be a little upside there. To make it work now, though, we still need to add in a big-time player, a Bauer, a Bosma, Cabrera. I guess we could think about moving on from at this point to Frelick, Goebel, Jacobs, Jose, Josh Young, Kin, Melendez, Bobby Witt Jr., all guys that we don't really want to add in. But when we added in DeCenzo to the offer, they're at least willing to give it some consideration. So I think I'm going to go ahead and submit that offer to the Brewers, see if they maybe accept it, or maybe they come back and they're not looking for somebody quite as good as the players that they're looking for right now. At least going to give it a shot. It would stink to move on from Roberts, but that would open up a lot of money for us. Give us a utility infielder who could start for us at shortstop if we needed to. He's obviously not an ideal starting shortstop, but it does give us a little bit of insurance against not bringing back Nicky Lopez, which is unlikely with his demands at this point. And then even if we moved Bobby Witt Jr. over there, we'd need a capable backup, which Zamora would certainly be. And as I said, I think Graceffo's got some little bit of upside. So we're going to go ahead and submit that offer to the Brewers and find out what they have to think about it. And Milwaukee has refused the deal, but there is a little bit of a different list of players that they'd consider. Dan Keogh, I really like him. He was our second-round pick a year and a half ago. Hasn't done much yet in rookie ball, but he's still not even 19 years old. Would definitely not want to lose out on him. Victor Rosa, a second baseman who hit reasonably well in Double-A this year, and you can see he profiles as having an average-ish to above-average major league bat. Doesn't have much of an arm. He's really a first baseman. You could play him at second if you had to. I don't know that I want to give him up in this deal. I'm not going to give up Frelick, not going to give up Jose, not going to give up Goebel. The question is whether we just want to clear the decks on Peyton Williams and avoid potentially paying him close to $11 million next year. I think we could probably get a little more for Williams if we trade him on his own than throwing him into this, but I like Zamora as a utility infielder and an emergency starting shortstop who has a decent bat. And as I said, Graceffo, profiles based on his past as a 4th or 5th starter, but I think maybe he's got enough upside that he could be kind of a 3rd starter and, a little better pitcher than he's looked like so far with a good defense behind him pitching in a big ballpark. So, I am going to, before I respond to this, just see what we can get for Peyton Williams as far as a straight-up offer. And if it's not overwhelming, I had talked about wanting to potentially move on from Peyton Williams and his big contract anyways. So if I like the two guys that we're getting in return for him better than the type of player we can get in a straight up offer for him, I might just include him in that deal to get it done and get two potentially really big contracts next year in Spencer Bauer and Peyton Williams off of our books before we head into the off season. And there's really not a lot here that we're being offered for Peyton Williams. Brian Lavastida, 30-year-old catcher I looked at, but he's pretty miserable defensively as a catcher. Not that great a hitter. Our old friend Eddie's Leonard is making a lot of money now, not much less than Peyton Williams is or is expected to. And he's a decent major league player, but probably overpaid, particularly for a team like a Royals. You can see it's a lot of players in their early to mid 30s making decent money, or guys that just aren't that good. So Jordan Groshans, interesting, infielder. He's not all that different than the guy we're thinking about picking up from Milwaukee, but he's making a lot more money, so it's not really that interesting. Honestly, I think I am going to be willing to put Peyton Williams into this deal and try to get things done with Milwaukee. So let's discuss the trade again. They said that Peyton Williams would make it work, although he's not listed there still. But hopefully we can pull this off. Now they say they won't do it. We have to add in Kin? Come on. This is kind of a bug in the game. They said they would do the deal if we threw in Williams, and we throw him in there, and now they say it's not going to work. So that is a bit annoying. Yeah, if we add in Peyton Williams, we would have a deal. And then when I add in Peyton Williams, he says, oh, you also have to add in Shi-Tong Kin. Well, that's not going to happen. So that's disappointing, especially because they won't even let us submit the offer to them or complete the trade. It's just like, you're killing us. You're killing us here, OOTP. I don't know what to do here. I definitely don't want to give them any of these bigger time players that they're looking for. I had thought about throwing in Ricardo Cabrera, but Cabrera is still better defensively and younger than Zamora. I mean, honestly, what we might want to do is just take Zamora out of the deal and just do Graceffo. But before we get to that point, I'm going to go against my better judgment and throw in $1 million cash. Submit the offer to them with $1 million extra and see what they come back with. Probably not gonna move the needle, but throwing spaghetti up against the wall here and seeing if anything will stick. And probably not surprisingly, the Brewers once again say no way, and they come back with a very similar list. They still say they'll take Peyton Williams. Shortstop Willie Flores. International free agent signing from about 2 years ago. He's got a lot of potential. Definitely don't want to give him up. I'll see if putting Williams in now will move the needle. I doubt it will. Yeah, throwing a player who can really contribute. No, we're not going to give you Kin. So, this has been really disappointing that I guess I don't know if this is just meant to have the opposing GM lie to you about what he would do to frustrate you, or I don't really know exactly what's going on here, but it's definitely a little bit annoying. So if we take Mr. Zamora out of the deal and just go for Graceffo, before he had said that he would do Austin Roberts straight up for Graceffo, and now he won't even do that, although he'll take just about anyone in the organization. We can throw in anybody, essentially. We look at these guys, half-star players. 26-year-old reliever David Rodriguez. Yeah, he looks useless. So we can put him in, but the fact that like a week ago when this started, he would have done Austin Roberts for Graceffo straight up, and now he won't, makes me think that Marcus Sabata is just kind of messing with me at this point. And before we agree to this, I'm actually just going to shop Roberts again, see if we can get a better option for him. It's kind of weird that I'll go back and see what Milwaukee would offer straight up now when we shop him. And yeah, they'll offer Zamora now, but they won't offer Graceffo. And I want Graceffo, especially if we're going to be moving on from Trevor Rogers. I feel like I need Graceffo. So kind of stinks that we have to throw in an extra player than if we had just gone straight up for Graceffo a week ago when we started this conversation. But we've got to get Austin Roberts at 16 to 18 million next year as a 31-year-old off the books. He has had a really nice career in Kansas City. You can see 6 seasons with the Royals, led the league in saves 3 times, 4-time All-Star, 2-time Reliever of the Year, and won a World Series with us. 220 saves over those 6 years, 502 strikeouts in 368 and a third innings with a 2.57 ERA, 66 FIP minus, 2.06 SIERA. He has been an excellent pitcher for us over the years, but I don't think the Royals can be paying $16 to $18 million for a reliever who's going to pitch 60 to 80 innings. And I do kind of like Graceffo. He's only expected to make about $4.6 million next year, and I think, as I said, worst case scenario, he's a 4th or 5th starter, and I think there is a chance that we may get kind of 3rd starter performance kind of out of him. So we are going to go ahead and complete this trade, bring Graceffo onto the team. Fans not pleased that we've moved on from Austin Roberts. Let's see what that does to fan interest. And it was I think a 3 or 4 point hit. So it's not great, but you can see that now has started to open up some money for us for extensions. So I think we're doing what we need to do to kind of clear the decks on some of these big salaries. And Peyton Williams is going to be the next one to go. And I took the veterans off the list when I shopped Peyton Williams, and you can see, the same names as before. Ivan Herrera, could be the way to go. He's out of option years, unfortunately, which means he's going to have to be our catcher next season. Actually, he's heading into free agency, so he wouldn't even have him next year. It's basically, we can non-tender an offer to Peyton Williams. I'd like to at least get something. What about Brendan White here? Oof. Very mediocre-ish reliever. It's kind of scary how little value Peyton Williams actually has. The only one of these players that is somewhat intriguing to me as I've looked into them is Jordan Groshans, who we talked about not all that long ago. And we could use the utility infielder now since we didn't get both players from Milwaukee. The issue is he's making some pretty big money for a player that we would view as kind of a utility infielder, insurance at shortstop. If we could get Chicago to retain a lot of his contract, I would do it for Peyton Williams, but I don't think they're going to retain a ton of his contract, but let's see. Certainly not going to retain 100%. Let's see if they cut it down to 50. No, they won't even do it there. And to get them to keep 50% of it, we have to add in a pretty good player. So it's really disappointing how little value Peyton Williams has at this point. I guess the next step now is to see what we can get if we bundle Peyton Williams and Zach DeCenzo together. They both came up together. Could they both be leaving the Royals together? And it's a very similar list of players. I think the only difference is Yankees would offer us Anthony Volpe. Good personality, good utility infielder. Unfortunately, he's making $10.2 million a year, so he's not making utility infielder money, but would be a good personality in the clubhouse. Ivan Herrera, he's the same catcher who's heading into free agency, so that doesn't do anything for us. So if the Yankees would retain a ton of Volpe's money, which maybe the Yankees could afford to do, I would do that. Yeah, I knew you wouldn't keep 100%. Would you keep 50% of his money? Nope. And they'd want somebody. So yeah, it's just sad how little value Peyton Williams and Zach DeCenzo have as they head into the final years of their arbitration eligibility. And obviously, we're also playing on a relatively challenging trade setting, which doesn't help us get all of the value that we can for these guys. But I would have thought that we could get something for them without just non-tendering them. Little bit. I mean, DeCenzo's making so little next year, potentially. As I mentioned, he was expected to make about $5 million, and now he's down to $3.3 million since he's been so bad. We could potentially run him back, and you can see he's actually got a little bit of different value here and some different players. Taj Bradley, a decent right-handed reliever who actually could start in a pinch. He has been a starter in the past for Tampa Bay. Not a bad arm. That's why they're willing to give him, because he's going to be making, $11, $12, $13 million a year for not a bad arm, which is getting expensive. But DeCenzo actually still has some value and wouldn't mind kind of keeping him on the team. But Peyton Williams at this point, sadly, just has very little value. We'll see if we can get a prospect package for him. I can't imagine we're going to get anything for him. Nothing. If they include additional players, is there someone we can throw in with Peyton Williams to get something interesting? They're thinking about it, so there's probably going to be some offers, but it's probably going to be players that we don't want to get rid of. Yeah, Alex Vasquez, who's a replacement for Peyton Williams. Junior Marin, not ready to give up on him yet. Alex Vasquez, wow. It's just kind of sad that Peyton Williams, you look at the offensive profile he has in a 117 WRC plus over the course of his career. He is a good power hitter. 150 home runs in less than 2,200 major league at-bats, but the fact that he's going to be making $10 to $12 million next year and he really has no position to play defensively makes him essentially worthless in this game. So we're going to broaden out the search for Williams to include veterans, anything possible we can get for him. Pretty confident that we're not going to be making him an offer in arbitration. So right now we're just going to try to extract any tiny bit of value we can get for him at this point. And hopefully we'll be able to spend that money on someone who will be much more value-oriented and cost-effective next year. And I've just been unable to find any value for Peyton Williams. So I think, it's only October 4th. The playoffs aren't even really, they've begun, but nothing too exciting has happened yet. You can see we're only in the division series. So I'll perhaps try to shop Peyton Williams again once the season is officially over and see if before we get to needing to make an arbitration decision on him. Maybe we'll be able to get a different offer from somebody on him, and at least it keeps the optionality for us that when we look at who the potential free agents are, and when we also look at what our financial situation looks like, particularly after we make the decision on Trevor Rogers, maybe there's a chance we run back with Peyton Williams for a final year. I think I'd prefer not to do it at that kind of money, but if there's not a lot of good free agents that are going to be hitting the market, maybe we do bring him back if we can't get anything for him in trade, and there's no one better to spend the money on. So we'll keep thinking about it. And I did just, put Gordon Graceffo, who we had picked up in the trade for Roberts, on the 40-man roster and the 26-man roster. And you can see that Nichols has him slotted in as our number 3 starter, which makes me feel, a little better about potentially moving on from Trevor Rogers and his big number next year. I feel like, if we let Rogers go after letting Roberts go, that gives us the money that we could be a player for literally anyone who's likely to be a free agent. Now, I don't even know if there's going to be any real interesting free agents out there, but a lot of expensive relievers, which are not all that interesting. Aaron Nola is kind of the best, but 36 years old, coming off some shoulder inflammation, and he's going to be looking for a big number. But as far as batters, a few veteran shortstops: Carlos Correa, Trey Turner, Tim Anderson. So there's players out there, no one that exciting, and they're all looking for big money at that age. Correa, Correa could be the shortstop to take over for Nicky Lopez. Would obviously be a great glove and a plus bat, but I don't think that ultimately, even if we do let go of Rogers on top of moving on from the money we were going to be paying Roberts, and even if we move on from Peyton Williams, we could fit Carlos Correa in, but he's probably going to be looking for more than a 1-year deal. So we're going to have a lot of decisions to make in the offseason, but we're not quite there yet. And I honestly don't think that even if Correa is a free agent, I don't think that we would be really serious players for him. But I may try to get Shi-Tong Kim signed up for the long term. He's going to make $5 million in this next season, but when we look at our salary situation, he's expected to be making close to 13, close to 16, and then close to 20 in those 3 arbitration years before he's a free agent. So even over these 4 years before he gets to arbitration, he's kind of expected to make about 13 million-ish a year over these next 4 years when you average it all out. So being able to get him signed for 8 years at an average of $15.5 million doesn't sound that unreasonable. Obviously, I'm going to try to do it for less, but he's only 24 years old, and he's a big part of our future. I would not mind getting Shi-Tong Kim signed up for buying out several of his potential free agent seasons before he gets even more expensive for us. As I've talked about, love the bat, love the defensive versatility, and love the glove at first base and second base. Fine with the glove at third, and he's not optimal at shortstop with that arm, but you could still play him there in a pinch. He's durable. This is a guy that I would not mind building around for the long term. So Kim was looking for $15.5 million a year over 8 years with a player option in the final season. We're offering him an average of $14 million a year over 8 years, and it's a team option in the final season and a bit more backloaded. I don't think he's going to go for this, but I always like to try to save every penny I can, especially when I'm playing a team like the Royals. He came down a tiny bit to 15.4 million, but it looks like that player option in the final season is real important to him. So we're coming up a bit. We're coming up from 14 million to almost 14.9 million, but we have put the team option for a somewhat higher number in that final year back in there. And he's back to 15.5 million. So we're going to have to offer him the player option. I think we'll be able to get him for a little less than that 15.5 million, but it seems like that player option in the final season is important to him. All right, we're almost meeting him on his terms now. We're up to 15.25 million average over 8 years, and we've left in the player option for the final season. So we're only $250,000 a year off of what he's looking for on average. The only issue is that we have made that last option year a little bigger. He's willing to think about it. So we may get a big-time player signed this offseason before we've even technically gotten to the offseason. And we've got Shi Tong Kin signed. I think it's a good deal for us. Only 24 years old. Excellent defensive player. He's durable. Really good bat, put up over his first 2 seasons a 142 and a 131 OPS plus. And you can see, we've got him for 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, and then 24 in that player option at the age of 31. It's going to be inexpensive towards the end of it for us, particularly if we're not able to continue expanding our revenue base here with the Royals. But if things get real bad, it's a very tradable contract to a big market team. Fans are ecstatic that we've signed him to that deal. That made up for the departure of Roberts, at least in terms of our fan interest, so that's positive. So we'll see what happens here over the final weeks of the postseason. I think we've done our big moves for the time being. Yankees and the White Sox facing off in the ALCS, and the Cardinals and the Dodgers facing off in the NLCS. And our old buddy Trevor Rogers is eligible to come off the IL. We are actually going to send him on a rehab assignment. Omaha is still actually playing in the playoffs. And we are also going to request a scouting report from our scout on him just to see what he looks like after this latest injury, whether that injury proneness is really fragile and whether his numbers are what they are. I think it's almost certain that we're going to move on from that team option, but want to know as much as possible about him before we make that decision. And the Yankees and the Cardinals facing off in the World Series. We'll see what happens with that, and then we're going to be moving on officially to the off season for everybody in baseball, not just the Royals. And the World Series is over, and the Yankees with a 4-3 win over the Cardinals. Our former World Series MVP, Julio Rodriguez, won that in 2027 with us and wins the World Series MVP 2 years later with the Yankees. So congratulations to the former Royal, Julio Rodriguez, with another World Series championship. Looking here at the posted players coming over from Japan, and don't think there's anyone that we're going to be willing to spend a lot of money on there. And we have made it to the off season. Going to need a option year decision on Aaron Ashby and Trevor Rogers, as we've been talking about. Ownership not happy with how the season went. Want us to do better finances. They are pleased that we're improving the farm system. They're undecided in our performance, and they expect better from us. They're only expecting a winning record next year, although they still want us to build a dynasty in the next 5 years. So, and we still have to make some money and get to a top 6 minor league system. So, same goals that we've had, although, now instead of winning it all, we just need a winning record. Let's see what the new budget's going to look like. Oh, $202 million. So they've cut our budget. That is going to hurt. Team trainer retired. We've been going year to year on trainers for a lot of times. Lost a good pitching coach in the minors in Cal Eldred. But the big hit is we're going back down to the $202 million budget that we were back in 2028. So for the first time since we took over, our budget is actually going down, and you can see that leaves us at this point, despite trading away Roberts with no money for free agents and extensions. Probably increases the chance that we cut loose Trevor Rogers in the coming days, and we still can free up a lot of money if we move on from Peyton Williams too. So definitely some big decisions for the Royals to make when we get into the off season in earnest in our next episode. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.